Good morning, everybody. The governor, of course, issued a press release last night after consulting with us for several days that he had made the decision to sign the budget bill and to also sign 10 appropriation bills. He vetoed one, so we're obviously very happy today. We being Mark Muco to my left, our Deputy Secretary who's in charge of many things at the Capitol and Department of Revenue, but the most important one is to project our revenues and help us with understanding our revenue side of our budget. And Mike Cook, of course, who's the State Budget Director and works tirelessly along with Tammy Scraggs, who's here with him today, to understand the expenditure side of our budget. So it's a happy day for West Virginia, and it's certainly a happy day for the Department of Revenue, because when the governor signed the budget bill last evening, it is a culmination of a long process. Without belaboring the point and me sounding like the college professor that I am, we started last summer in July meeting with the governor and getting some general directives on how to construct our budget. And we worked in July and August on getting out information to all of our stakeholders with the general notion that the governor instructed us to inform our stakeholders that we did not want to raise the budget from the year before. That would be baseline fiscal year 2018. But if you did have reasons to raise your budget, of course, you would be appearing in front of the Department of Revenue group, our budget working group, between Labor Day and the end of October. So we held about 24 stakeholder meetings. They were attended by, of course, parties who wanted to discuss their budgets with us, from our elected office holders such as the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Agriculture, our State Treasurer, and to our various executive agencies that are in our budget. Also attending many of those working meetings were representatives of the House of Delegates, of course Jeff back there in the back, and Matthew Pauley and others, and representatives from the Senate as well. And we worked very hard to try to put together a good budget plan, and we did. We constructed the budget, we started to assemble it in October, November, and the governor answered the most important question immediately. The most important question that helped us build our budget and get it put together was what type of pay raise that he wanted to propose to the legislature. And I think it's no secret that last October the announcement was made that the governor wanted to propose an average 5% pay raise for all state employees. And then, of course, we also had the directive that the governor later on proposed that we create, and the legislature create, a PEIA rainy day fund, which helped stabilize and will stabilize in the future our PEIA rates for our employees. So those were two big ticket items that needed to be met on the front end of these budget discussions. While we were doing that, at the end of December, on December 31st, 2018, we were halfway through fiscal year 19, get my fiscal years right, the current fiscal year, and Mark Muco, in consultation with the governor's office, we concluded that our budget surplus as we started this calendar year, January 1st, 19, was $186 million. So we were working on two tracks. We had $186 million surplus halfway through the fiscal year. That was great news, an indication that we were doing very well financially. At the same time, we were trying to prepare for the governor the fiscal year 2020 budget, which was introduced to the legislature on January 9th of this year, January 9th, 19. Along with that, the budget, we had a series of supplemental appropriations that we proposed to the legislature. And I'm looking around the crowd here, and there's plenty of expertise in this audience about how the budget works. But without belaboring the point, the supplemental bills were out of the current surplus of $186 million. And the governor, on the first day of the session, raised the revenue estimates by $142 million. And then, of course, we had $58 million of unappropriated money in the fiscal year 19 budget as well. So those were two things that we considered as we put forth this plan. Some of the themes of the budget, the fiscal year 20 budget was $4,675 million of general revenue, and that was our benchmark number that was developed by Mark Muco in consultation with our office. And some of the other key points was the program that we have fondly called Jim's Dream, which is a vocational, educational, and drug rehabilitation program that was very near and dear to the governor's heart in preparing this budget, proposing it to the legislature. As I mentioned, the average 5% pay raise, increased fund for tourism, the PEI rainy day fund proposal, and of course, as we followed through the 60-day session, there were other bills introduced in the legislature concerning the severance tax issue for coal severance in West Virginia, and of course the Social Security, whether we're going to tax Social Security income. So all those things were tracked carefully by Mark Muco and Mike Cook as we tried to monitor how the governor's bill was doing. When we came to the end of the session, the legislature on time, on last Saturday, on March 9th, we had, of course, the legislature clearly agreed with the governor's plan and passed the budget bill. And let me tell you some numbers that will illustrate my point. The governor's budget of $4,675,361, 98.7% of that budget proposal was approved in the fiscal year 2020 budget unchanged. And that was a tremendous number as far as we were concerned, and that 98.7% of the budget was approved out of fiscal year 20 as proposed for fiscal year 20. Now that left the remainder, 1.3% of the budget, which was about $62 million. And virtually, and I would say almost all of that 62 million was approved or funded through other means. And it was funded through surplus and supplemental appropriations. So it's fair to say that the governor's budget came through the legislative session and was approved by the legislature and signed by the governor intact, completely and totally, with very few exceptions. And there's always a few million that might have moved here or there. But when you add up the numbers, we are very pleased, and the governor is very pleased, that he and the legislature could work together to come up with such a successful budget. Look at 2 years ago. We all were sitting here on June the 18th, right before the state holiday on June 20th, quarreling back and forth as to whether or not the governors could get an approved budget. This year, the governor and the legislature worked together, and as a result, the numbers don't lie. We've got a very good budget, one that was funded, and many of the governor's initiatives, if not all of his initiatives, were approved and validated by the legislature. So we're happy here today. It's a great day for the people of West Virginia, and it's an indication that after the 60-day airing of the budget during the session and all the bills that went back and forth and all the discussions that went back and forth about various programs, when you added up the supplementals and you added up the budget, the 10 supplementals and the budget bill, you came out almost exactly where you started with this budget. So it's certainly a success, and we're very happy about it. Again, I think it's a credit to Mike Cook, Mark Muco, and all the good people that work with them, how hard they worked to bring this together and worked night after night, week after week to monitor what was going on in the legislature to make sure that we had good data all the way up to the finish line, including good fiscal notes, good information about some of the other bills that were not passed completely through. But I think that we really felt that this time around we did it right, and that the governor's bills, the governor's budget was viewed very favorably by the legislature. So we want to thank the legislature, and we want to thank everybody for working so hard to help us reach the conclusion that came last night when the governor signed the budget bill on March 14th. So with that, I've got the deep dive experts here to my left and my right. We've got a lot of data up here, and let me just run through these supplementals very quickly. Supplemental Bill 424 was a supplemental appropriation to the Civil Contingency Fund. The governor has signed a bill approved by the legislature of $10 million to that fund. Senate Bill 435 was a bill proposing a supplemental appropriation to what we call Jim's Dream. $9.7 million went to vocational appropriation or vocational education. $3 million went to education. Senate Bill 677, Division DHHR, $24,848,000 to the Division of DHHR. Supplemental appropriation for the Lottery Revenue Fund to the Office of Technology. And that's very important. There wasn't a lot of discussion of that. That's an $18.425 million supplemental appropriation to cybersecurity. And we are constantly worried and we're constantly monitoring through the Office of Technology to be sure that we have careful cybersecurity, particularly for our tax division, which constantly gets attempts to break through the firewall of the database that we have at the Department of Taxation. Supplemental appropriation to Division of Finance for West Virginia OASIS program that will be $298,000. That will be monitoring our grant programs, which is an initiative of Ann Erling in the governor's office. A supplemental appropriation to DMAPS for $766,000. Of course, that was approved by the governor. An improvement to the Educational Broadcasting Authority, Senate Bill 681, $7.4 million. $105 million, Senate House Bill 2665 to the PEA Rainy Day Fund. Supplemental appropriation to the Department of Corrections, $20,609,000, and a supplemental appropriation to the Development Office, Department of Commerce, $500,000. Those were all signed by the governor yesterday. Those are 10 supplementals. We were blessed. We were blessed to have an excess amount of money where we were able to fund many of these things. The one veto was House Bill 3148, which was a supplemental appropriation to DHHR for $53 million. Of that amount, $22.7 million was spent by the legislature, allocated, and that will leave us with $30.3 million from that supplemental appropriation, which is now unappropriated in the fiscal year 19 budget. So if we come back into session, that creates $30.3 million in unappropriated funds available in the fiscal year 2019 budget. So that's my overview. On behalf of the governor, thank you for coming today. He felt it was very important that we as a revenue team outline a little more detail on the budget, and we're here to answer any questions that you might have.
As of today, what do you project the budget surplus to be, and looking ahead, where might that money be spent?
Mark, I'll let you answer the question about what you project the surplus to be as of today.
Well, the official revenue estimates were raised twice during the session for a total of $167.5 million, so the bulk of it has been accounted for and has already been appropriated. There's additional surplus likely as long as the revenue trends continue as is for the remainder of the fiscal year, and easily that could be in the neighborhood of another $40–50 million, somewhere in that range. Depends on some factors that will happen in the springtime. In the final surplus in any given year, and the state always has to run a surplus every single year in order to make things happen. So even in bad years, we'll run a small surplus. But the surplus final determination won't occur until the end of July. At the end of July, the month of July, the agencies have to spend their allotments, and whatever is not spent drops down to surplus. So the surplus is partially revenue driven, and partially expirations and budget authority that's driven.
I know you guys are more numbers and money guys than policy guys, but is it feasible or possible some of that money could go into the road fund as the governor suggested the other day?
I won't speak for the governor or the legislature. That would require supplemental appropriation, but I think it's fair to say that everybody's focused on the roads right now. And we can certainly say that on behalf of the governor.
Why was that the HHR appropriation,
Why was it vetoed?
Yeah.
That bill involved taking $53 million of surplus of $19 and moving it into the 20 budget. It was a front load. So at the same time, the legislature had expended about $22.7 million of that in the budget. So the governor felt, number one, that we had adequate funds for now, and we felt that as well, in the Medicaid fund, and that by vetoing the bill, it allowed the 22.7 to be funded and also allowed $30 million to remain available to us in the fiscal year 19 budget.
So they had already asked you for money, but they could give it to them out of the 2019 budget?
They moved it from, the legislature attempted to move it from 19 into 20.
Okay.
And we felt that it would be better to keep it into 19. It's still there. Now 30 million of it is now unappropriated for fiscal year 19. So it's unappropriated between now and June 30th.
Has the governor expressed any view on how that money should now be spent? Roads, for example?
I'll repeat what I said because it's been, of course, in the news all week. The governor is very interested and very committed and very focused on the road issue right now. But I certainly don't want to speak for whether there'll be a bill proposed yet to spend the $30 million on roads. I think one part of that is that Mark continues to monitor our surplus as we move through March, April, and May. But clearly, that's a very high emphasis with the governor, probably his number one priority.
If you could explain again how it was accounted for the teacher pay raises. I realize they weren't passed, but has money been kind of earmarked on a line item
Yes.
for that if in the eventuality?
Well, yes, the funds are allocated, or at least they are, I hate to use the word part. Is part the right word? What would be the right word? Yeah, they're appropriated as the governor recommended for the teacher pay raise. Of course, there still has to be another session of the legislature before it's finalized. But the funds are there and they are in the budget. And that's the teachers and the school service personnel. The other state employees are not affected by that particular proviso or that caveat.
Because they're covered by the budget, correct?
That's correct. And it's an average pay raise of 5%.
Dave, you mentioned some of the dark years, 2 or 3 years ago where we were. I mean, how would you grade the state's financial condition right now, given this budget and given where we were 2 and 3 years ago?
It's remarkable, miraculous would probably be the 2 words I would use. I was here in January 17 and I participated in the meetings that were held initially with the governor when Mike McCallum was our budget director. Of course, Mark was here, and we were looking at some very, very, very significant deficits at that time. The uptick in revenue started shortly after the summer of 17, and it's been going basically unbridled since. Now, there's always been ups and downs, but we've had a very good run on revenue since October of 2017.
Do you all feel that any of the tax cuts the legislature passed this year can make future years another quarrelsome year, as you described it earlier? Any of the tax cuts that they passed, you were talking about like a quarrelsome budget year a couple of years ago and how this year is really good, but I was wondering if you're worried about, like as a, someone that knows the budget well, about future years might not being so blissful after passing so many tax cuts this year.
Actually, a lot of the tax cuts that were passed this year don't have an effect immediately. The way they were structured out, they have an effect over time. I wouldn't want to pretend to try to guess what we'll be looking like in fiscal year 23 because it's just too difficult at times to project. I will say this, I listen to Mark Muco every day. Our trending has trended very well since October of 2017. looking forward, Mark, I won't speak for Mark. If Mark wants to add anything about how we're looking between now and June 30th, do you want to add anything, Mark, to that?
Numbers for this current fiscal year are very good. The trend is either equal or better than my expectations overall for the current fiscal year. Next fiscal year's estimates are based on the assumption that things will slow down a little bit because of pipeline-related activities. But we have a lot of positives going on in the economy right now that are likely to continue. There's no sign of recession at the national level, and certainly the national economy as well as the state economy will go through periodic times of recession, but nothing on the current horizon for recession. And given that we're an energy economy, our fortunes are going to be tied partially to how well the natural gas industry and coal industry perform in the future, and that's tied to a whole bunch of factors, particularly pricing, demand for product, and exports in the case of the coal industry. Those are all factors that can swing, and some of it depends upon the domestic economy, and some of it depends upon the economic factors in various foreign nations, which can change pretty rapidly. And a couple of years ago, we suffered through a downturn in exports and downturn in energy, and again, since the end of 2016, we've had an upturn in exports, driven mainly by coal. And recently, last year or so, we've had a major upturn in pricing of natural gas and oil, which is a big contributing factor to the current yield coming from the gas and oil severance centers.
One other thing I would add, we literally monitor these numbers every single day. Mark brings me a revenue report every business day. The other thing that served us so well and will continue to serve us well when we go to Wall Street for bonding ratings is the rainy day fund that we have. Our rainy day fund is about 16+% of our general revenue fund, which is highly favored by the Wall Street bond rating agencies, and that's why we have good bond ratings.
Dollar amount, what's the rainy day fund at now? Is the money that was borrowed the last 2 years of every
I believe it's $720 million, about $720 million.
Rainy day fund is
The button.
what?
If you recall, Brad, at the end of the fiscal year, the surplus by law has to be half of it has to go to the rainy day fund. So we have been able to replenish the rainy day fund. In the last couple of years, we've ended the year with small surpluses, but we've done very well.
I'm back in the weeds on the Medicaid supplemental that was vetoed. Sitting through some House finance meetings, what they were describing was we're gonna pre-fund our Medicaid budget for future years, thinking about the slowdown and trying to compensate for a budget gap for the coming fiscal year. Is what they were talking about as pre-funding of Medicaid, is that what was vetoed? Are those the same things?
Yeah, the attempt to put $53 million of 19 surplus into pre-funding Medicaid in 20 is what was vetoed. The legislature had spent about 22.7 of that through supplementals. So when that came back, that created a net of $30 million. So now we have 30 million of the 53 million is unappropriated right now. So it's not all spent, but it's there. We felt, number one, the Medicaid numbers, if you've heard presentations from DHHR, I'm sure you have been coming down a lot in the last couple of years. And secondly, the balance of that fund, Mike, was how much? The Medicaid fund.
It's going to be about 127 million at the end of this fiscal
year. Yeah, at the end of this fiscal year, it has 127 million in it already. It's projected. So we felt it was better, the governor felt it was better, and we advised him as such to not, he didn't need to do that now. It'd be better to hold on to the funds in fiscal year 19.
Do you understand why Medicaid ends up with leftover money in it every year? Because I haven't been able to figure that out.
Well, I think the size of the Medicaid program is very huge. It's over $4 billion a year, so when they talk about $120 million, that's a very small fraction of that pie. It's just such a large portion of the budget that you get a little bit of overages one way or another in any given period of time. And the idea is to have a little bit of an overage versus an underage. So it's monitored carefully, but it's a huge program. Now, most of the money, about 75%, comes from the federal government, but it's a very big program.
Quick correction, and this is a good correction. Mike looked up the most current balance on the rainy day fund. It's at $734 million. As of February 28th. So I was a little low on that. And that's something, Brad, that the rating agencies look at it as your rainy day fund as a percentage of your general revenue budget.
I tried to push you guys on the spot, but is there any particular reason why the governor isn't here today to address these issues and answer our questions as well as you guys?
I don't typically, I'll answer it this way. We talked to the governor for hours about this yesterday, and when he made his final decision. And then, in general, I think the governor thought we would probably do a better job going into a deep dive and explaining the details of the budget. So he suggested that we have this press conference today to get into the particulars and the numbers, the deep numbers that we just got into. But we spent a lot of time with the governor in the last couple of days going over all these numbers. Other questions? If not,
So the part of the
yeah.
budget that you said like 97% of it's the same, right?
98.7.
98.7, okay, but so is in that 1.3% that's different, is that include the teacher pay raises in there?
No. Okay, 98.7% of the budget, fiscal year 20 proposed budget was approved in the fiscal year 20 budget. Proposed, approved. 1.3%, which was about 62 million, was funded from other sources. Some of it was funded through excess funding that was available or supplementals. But no, the teacher pay raises were not in that. They were in the 98.7% that was funded. Other questions? If not, thank you very much for coming. I realize this isn't the most glamorous subject.
You could have a platter. Thank you.
Thank you.